why communism doesn't work, but after watching the videos others had already made on the subject, I felt that I really had nothing to add. So instead I'm going to respond to this video, which was created by the Institute of Economic Affairs, a UK-based right-wing think tank that promotes neoliberalism. So let's begin.
Socialism is popular in Britain. More popular than capitalism, at any rate.
That was the result of a YouGov survey last year, in which 36% of respondents expressed a favourable view of socialism, while only 32% expressed an unfavourable one. Capitalism, meanwhile, was viewed unfavourably by 39% of respondents, and only 33% viewed it favourably. You don't have to be a devout believer in free markets to wonder why this is the case.
It may be a shock to you, but it isn't to me. The fact is that your neoliberal ideology has largely been a catastrophic failure in Great Britain since its inception in the 1980s. It led to the waste of an oil boom on tax cuts, mass homelessness, and massive poverty. Now that was only in the 80s and 90s, and now that same neoliberal party is in power again. Massive poverty, mass homelessness, and thousands of premature deaths due to cuts to welfare and services. So, your system has proven to be extremely cruel and inefficient, and you are surprised that people have an unfavourable view of it? What a joke!
When the catastrophic failure of socialism is visible around the world.
Take Venezuela, a country that just a few years ago was being hailed as a panacea of democratic socialism.
Yes, let's look at Venezuela. The stats showed that the private sector grew faster under Hugo Chavez than the state sector. Indeed, under Chavez, the private sector's share of economic activity grew from 65% to 71%.
By everyone, from Ken Livingstone to Noam Chomsky to Bernie Sanders.
American journalists talk about how bad a country is because people are lining up for food. That's a good thing.
That statement was made in the 1980s, more than a decade before Chavez came to power. It should be noted, though, that when Sanders made that statement, Venezuela was falling into desperate poverty under incompetent neoliberal governments.
Thanks to catastrophic economic mismanagement, Venezuela has gone from being the richest country in South America to being one of the poorest.
That old lie. Venezuela was not a rich country when Hugo Chavez came to power. The economy had in fact suffered immensely, which is why Chavez was elected in the first place. Furthermore, in the entire presentation they do not mention the fact that the fall in the oil price devastated the Venezuelan economy, which has always relied too much on oil.
Take the two natural experiments, where a country has been split into a socialist and a capitalist part. Korea.
South Korea's rise was due to free market capitalism. Let me describe South Korea's economic model from 1960 to 1997. A planned economy in peacetime where private businesses were made to follow the orders of the central government. If they failed to do so, their businesses were nationalized.
Even more than in Japan, the government told businessmen what kind of factories were to be built and where. The pride of the new Korea was to be a huge steelworks. Park said, "Steel is national power." A workforce of tens of thousands was commanded by a former general with a can-do military approach. If the workmanship fell below standard, he had it blown up.
The funny thing is that these morons spend the last few minutes of the video attacking the command economy, yet they use South Korea as an example of free market capitalism. It's a joke.
And before 1990, Germany.
To compare East Germany and West Germany without any background is utterly dishonest. First of all, East Germany had most of its industry stripped by the Soviets after the Second World War. West Germany, however, received massive aid from the Marshall Plan. In 1950, West Germany was already far wealthier than East Germany, so to compare the two without any context is utterly dishonest.
Or take Cuba, where the consequences of its 50-year totalitarian experiment are obvious to all who care to look at the evidence.
Evidence, you say? Like the fact that Cuba has a higher life expectancy rate than the US, has the lowest infant mortality rate in Latin America, and very high educational standards? Socialist Cuba achieved all this despite being blockaded by a world superpower.
Socialism doesn't work, and it has never worked anywhere for longer than a few years at best.
Socialism succeeded in turning an agrarian backwater that had been ruined by civil war into an industrial superpower within 30 years. Furthermore, socialist policies also succeeded in almost doubling the life expectancy of the Chinese people in the space of 25 years.
So what explains the enduring appeal of this clearly terrible idea? Every socialist experiment has, at some point, been praised by Western intellectuals. Praise has been dished out even for Stalin's Soviet Union and Mao's China. But socialism's proponents have been very effective at distancing themselves from real-world examples whenever they have ended in tears.
Actually, pro-capitalist shills are far more guilty of that fallacy. For example, every single time a pro-capitalist government collapses, I am told, oh, it wasn't real capitalism, it was corporatism. Some even go further. For example, Ludwig von Mises not only praised fascism in the 1920s, but also worked as a fascist advisor to the fascist government in Austria. However, after fascism was discredited, the Austrian school declared that fascism was a form of socialism. I, however, have never denied that Mao's China and the USSR were socialist.
Socialism's proponents is usually to argue that true socialism must be democratic, with decisions about economic life being taken by the workers themselves. But consider for a moment how unworkable that would be.
Imagine Switzerland, the home of direct democracy, which decides more by referenda than any other country. Now let's pretend that Switzerland went socialist and expanded its model of direct democracy to the newly socialized sectors. This would mean referenda on the production of razors, carpets, gloves, ink cartridges, curtains, kettles, toasters, microwaves, baking trays, washing up liquids, tiles, blenders, pizzas, and many, many other things.
No, it wouldn't. There would be no national vote to decide what each industry produces. Not one socialist has ever suggested a stupid system like that. Under a democratic socialist system, workers would be able to elect their own managers and representatives to the planning board. At the planning board, the democratically elected official would be able to represent the interests of the workers and have a say on how the economy is run. Furthermore, unlike modern democracy, workers will be able to recall their representatives any time they feel that their representatives are doing a bad job representing their interests.
All the heavy lifting would have to be delegated to expert committees, at which point real socialism would become unreal again.
Again, there would be strong worker involvement with these committees, so that point is moot. Compare this today, where workers have virtually no say on how they are treated, nor on how their industries are run.
This is why the state usually falls back on coercion and intimidation to achieve its ends, by clamping down on alleged saboteurs and speculators. This is why the state usually falls back on coercion and intimidation to achieve its ends.
Yes, how dare the Venezuelan government clamp down on terrorists who set fire to the Supreme Court? Monstrous!
By clamping down on alleged saboteurs and speculators. As a result, the socialist state becomes increasingly authoritarian.
Your institute's beloved hero Margaret Thatcher labelled striking miners as the enemy within. Spare me the hypocrisy.
It's the rejection of private property, of the free market price system, of open competition, and of the natural inclinations of flourishing human beings that makes socialism fundamentally unworkable.
The system you described has impoverished thousands in one of the wealthiest countries in the world, causing the death of the disabled and the sick in the process. That is why Jeremy Corbyn's popularity has grown immensely despite the lies of the media. When it's all said and done, your ideology has done nothing for Britain except to make the lives of the majority more difficult, whilst enriching a tiny minority. No wonder it is so unpopular.